In Lecture 1, we discussed the problem of knowledge and theories of truth. But for some of you, it may still seem unclear as to why I should not be able to just look at any given thing within the physical world and say that I know what I see. Why would anyone think that we cannot acquire true knowledge from our rational deductions or within our empirical experiences? So today we need to look more closely at the nature of knowledge and the structure of justification. We should begin with some consideration of different types of knowing and some key terminology for navigating this tension between rational and empirical knowing. There are different types of knowledge. Episteme is a philosophical term that refers to a systematized method of understanding intellectual knowledge. The general approaches to philosophical and scientific investigation fit within this category. Doxa refers to common belief or popular opinion. Now, popular opinion can be based on fact or tradition or experience or assumption. We accept what seems to be. Whether it is justified or not, this is knowledge based on what they say. Now, who is they? It could be cultural or communal. So this could be the culture in general, pop culture, smaller subcultures. This could be certain communities that we're part of, religious communities, academic communities, social groups. This could involve correct information, or it could involve misinformation. It could involve ignorance or bias. Consider this. It is possible for even a group of academics within their peer-reviewed circles to perpetuate their own ideologies and interpretations of the facts, is it not? There is a philosopher in Portland who, among others, really rocked the boat a few years back by showing that they could publish trash within peer-reviewed journals as long as they disguised it within the language that certain peer-reviewed academic communities expected to see within papers that they predetermined to be good and appropriate. Even within the community of scientific scholarship, there's a looming question concerning published essays and observed facts and observational studies. If someone's tenure or career longevity or success within their field requires that they publish or perish, there is a great weight upon them to find something to publish and to receive recognition as having contributed to the field. Can this pressure not persuade one to interpret facts to their advantage, or perhaps to rush an observational study and make conclusions with a smaller rather than larger sample? Can this pressure not influence one to seek the acceptance of a community of scholars in order to get something out there and published? So doxa can be correct, but it can also raise some concerns. Then there is techne. This is technical know-how, craftsmanship, artistry, things like this. You can know a lot about a lot and still not know how to do basic things like change your oil, or if you're a musician, to string a guitar. And here there are actually degrees of know-how. The novice mechanic may not know how to rebuild an entire engine. The beginner guitarist may know how to play a G and a D chord, yet may have no knowledge as to how to go about writing a death metal or jazz song. Finally, there is gnosis, or secret, privileged knowledge. This is usually associated with a spiritual insight or a claim to enlightenment that is supposedly not commonly accessible to just anyone. So there are different types of knowledge and different means of acquiring understanding. And while our question, how do you know that you know what you think you know, may be applied to each area, the question really points back to epistemic certainty. For gnosis is a secret claim on understanding higher truths of reality. It's a secret claim to those questions of episteme. While know-how can be taught simply as know-how, you don't really have to understand all the ins and outs of engineering to be shown how to work on a car. Yet at some foundational level, know-how requires knowing that. Knowing that engines work in such and such a way, or knowing that consonant chords are formed on the guitar in such and such a way. This is because the world is such and such a way. Doxa is a claim on understanding, or episteme, which is acquired through common belief or tradition. But understanding the way the world is involves an intellectual investigation, whether scientific or philosophical, into the nature of reality. And so it is episteme to which everything ultimately comes back. And yet, it does not matter what I know about the world if I do not know how to function within the world. So, although the question of justification points back to epistemic certainty, there still remain two basic modes of knowledge in play. Propositional knowledge is knowledge about or knowledge that, whereas procedural knowledge is know-how. We use both, and both are important. Now, in trying to understand what is, we must be able to distinguish between what must be and what could have been otherwise. An experiential truth refers to a truth concerning my experience within the world. A non-experiential truth refers to a truth that does not refer to or rely upon my experiences. Necessity refers to non-experiential truths, while contingency refers to experiential truths. So a necessary truth means that we are talking about a non-experiential truth that could never be false. So when we think about all possible worlds, different ways the world might have been, some things might be different, some things would be the same. A necessary truth, if something is necessarily true, it means that regardless of how the world might have been constructed, this would still be the case. A contingent truth, on the other hand, or contingency, refers to experience-based truths, and so these are truths that could have been false if the world had unfolded differently. Now that we are considering what is true or can be known within experience versus what can be known apart from experience, we are ready for the terms a priori and a posteriori. Recognizing that prior means before and posterior is behind, an a priori truth or an a priori claim to knowledge is a non-experience-based claim to knowledge. This is knowledge that comes solely through the human rational mind itself. On the other hand, a posteriori knowledge, or an a posteriori claim to truth, involves experience-based knowledge. So knowledge that is acquired through our sense-based experiences, seeing, hearing, feeling, etc. Now, setting aside the question, for now, of how we come to acquire knowledge prior to experience, let's explore knowing within experience further. Concerning experiential knowledge, there are three primary means of acquiring knowledge. We can acquire knowledge from our direct sense experience. We can reflect on our experiences, acquiring knowledge through memory, or we can base a claim to knowledge upon the testimony of someone else's experience. And there are three possibilities concerning our acquisition of knowledge from within our own experience. On the view of direct realism, we are able to see the world exactly as it is. So when I see a cow, I am seeing the cow. I am seeing exactly what is before me. On the position of indirect realism, however, actual objects in themselves do not really match the way in which we perceive them. So although we rely on sense perception in gaining knowledge, our senses are easily deceived, and so we can never really be certain that we are seeing the object as it truly is. although we may be justified in believing it to be there. So on this view, when I see a cow, I am not actually seeing what is there. Rather, I am seeing an image. So my sense organs experience things and they interpret that information to my mind. And what I actually see takes place within my mind. And so I may not actually be seeing what is there. I might be able to trust that it is there, but what I actually see might be only an interpretation of what is there. Now, this might mean that I don't see things exactly as you do. Finally, there is introspection. In this case, we're not even considering what is happening external to me. This is about knowledge acquired internally. So anytime we reflect or ponder internally, this is introspection. Now, this could involve our logical reasoning. For example, if I am thinking about an idea and working through the argument in my mind, this is happening in time, so it is an experience, but all of that working through the idea, or maybe you're writing a paper and you're brainstorming, all that takes place on the inside. It's an introspective sort of thing. When I analyze my own emotional state and I evaluate how I am feeling, this is also a form of introspection. Well, this can also refer to reliving an experience or recalling a memory. So if I try to recall an experience that was meaningful and I try to picture myself at that location, and maybe I'm trying to remember what shirt I was wearing and who I was with and what they looked like at that time and what else was going on, and all of these things I am recalling sense datum. And because this pondering is happening in time, it is an experience, although it's not directly an external experience. It does involve recalling aspects of knowledge acquired through sense datum, but the experience itself, as it is happening now within my memory, is all internal. It's in my mind. And it is possible to even acquire information from a memory that wasn't readily available before reflecting. And it could be because it wasn't really an important detail. An example of this might be if you've ever seen the TV show Psych. So here you have someone who's really good at training their memory, and because of this, he is able to trick some people into thinking that he's psychic. Well, that detailed memory is a good example of this. So if I think on, maybe you went in for a job interview, and so you experienced several things about the room, but most of them weren't important. They're not why you were there, so you just kind of filed them away, or so you did not really commit to recalling them. You focused on what you were going to say, what you were going to be asked, looking the interviewer in the eye, etc. Well, in hindsight, maybe as you reflect upon that experience, maybe you ask yourself what was in the room. Perhaps as you reflect more closely upon the layout of the room, you might be able to recognize certain objects in the room that you didn't really pick up on before. And so in this case, you might call that an acquisition of knowledge. They had a potted plant in the corner. It was not important to the interview, so you didn't really pay attention to it then. But now that you are recalling your experience in the office, you can recall there was a potted plant. So although that sense datum came in the initial experience, the knowledge is now coming from the introspection. Okay, so think for a moment about the way in which we experience objects and colors. When we see a red apple, for example, do we really see a red apple? In fact, we do not. Did you know this? There are many colors within light, and red happens to be the most dominant within our experience of that thing. And so we experience redness where we also experience the object. Yet redness does not exist there. And so we cannot really say that the apple itself is red. Rather, we see a thing in which redness somehow seems to participate. And since our experience of color is tethered to our experience of light, and also perhaps informed by our expectations built upon prior experiences, why expect that everyone will experience color within objects the same? There is also something else that happens within our vision that raises an interesting question. When we see an object, our eyes flip the image upside down and then relay that information to our brains, wherein the object is flipped back right side up. Now, this may seem an interesting but insignificant detail, but here's the point. It could be said that the eye does not actually see the world as it is, and then the eye relays this not quite correct information to the brain, which corrects it. But if the brain did not experience the external world directly, and if the information sent to the brain from the object which did experience the world directly was reported technically incorrectly, then how do we really know that the brain interpreted the sense datum correctly? So our question really comes down to what counts as knowledge? And from this, when can I be said to have actually attained knowledge about something? The traditional definition of knowledge holds that a claim to knowledge must include three essential parts. A claim to knowledge must be justified, it must be true, and we must actually believe it. Note that this assumes a correspondence theory of truth. Recall that a coherence theory of truth holds that even if it is actually false, as long as I have no reason for believing a claim to be false, that is, as long as it coheres with my network of other beliefs, then I can claim to have true knowledge. On the contrary, the correspondence theory of truth holds that something is only true if it matches up to the way things actually are. So from the position of JTB, or justified true belief, person S only has knowledge concerning proposition P if proposition P correctly matches up to the way things really are. Moreover, person S must have good reasons for believing proposition P. But is it possible that we could ever be justified in believing something falsely? Can we be justified in a belief even without evidence for that belief? And finally, person S must actually believe proposition P. Consider the following scenario. It is the case that the Earth revolves around the sun, and it is the case that scientific data supports or justifies this claim. However, person S is a huge comic book fan and especially likes telepaths like Professor X. He has become increasingly convinced that there exists a mutant powerful enough to have entrapped all human beings within an illusion, within the matrix of his own mind. Because we have no access to what is actually true of the world beyond what this mutant has shown to us, and because we have no reason to rest assured that all of our scientific data has accurately described reality as opposed to merely describing the matrix the mutant has designed for us. For this reason, person S does not actually believe in the scientific claims of human knowledge. To him, we are just describing shadows on the wall, to use the Platonic metaphor. Now suppose, while convinced that this is actually the case, he has no proof, and so he dare not risk becoming the madman ridiculed by the cave dwellers. Thus, he will continue to play along with the language games of the cave until he can acquire proof. Now, ironically, he works as a high school science teacher. Suppose, in a given lesson, he must profess that the Earth revolves around the sun. This is true. Science supports it, thus it is a justified claim, but he does not actually believe it because he thinks all of reality understood by our science is only an illusion. In this case, in the moment that he professes the Earth revolves around the sun to his students, can it really be said that he has knowledge of this fact, given that he does not actually believe what he has said? Or ponder this. Before there was scientific evidence to justify any claim to the contrary, were ancient persons who believed the Earth to be flat justified in this belief? Can we rightly say that they had knowledge at the time? Now, the issue of justification raises many questions. For example, do we have epistemic responsibilities to others? Some philosophers have argued that since our beliefs inform our actions, our beliefs always carry a potential for harming other people. Consider, for example, witch hunts, certain that all witches are dangerous and that all people of a certain sort are witches. Therefore, we should all get rid of all people suspected of being witches. In order to prevent this sort of harm from bad beliefs or from ignorance or unjustified beliefs or false beliefs, we therefore ought never to accept a belief without sufficient evidence, because negligence increases the potential for harm. On the other hand, are there ever any times that we are justified in believing something even without evidentiary support? Consider, for example, belief in the existence of God. Now, as we will see in a later module, there are many arguments and evidences to support belief in the existence of God. But supposing one is ignorant of all of those things, without knowledge of any arguments or evidences for the existence of God, if someone believes that God exists, are they justified even despite lack of evidentiary support? Well, distinguishing between life and dead options, forced and unforced options, and trivial versus momentous options concerning the nature of belief, William James argued that it is permissible to believe something for which there is no sufficient evidence, so long as the belief is live, forced, and momentous. Whereas some would argue that we have an epistemic duty not to believe in God, since that belief might encourage practices such as extremist religious terrorism, James argued that belief in God is a live, forced, and momentous option, and therefore it is justified. First, he distinguishes between live and dead options. A live choice is one that is meaningful. It has an emotive appeal to the one who must choose. It is personally applicable. There are some things out there that just don't really affect you. If it's not the case that horses sleep standing up, does that wreck your life? Probably not. Your choice to believe or disbelieve that fact does not really impact your life. It is a dead choice. Next, he distinguishes between forced or non-forced choices. An option is forced if it is an either-or situation and you must choose one or the other. An option is non-forced if, even when faced with an either-or, you are not forced to choose either one. Consider, for example, the option to pass this class. If you remain enrolled within my class, then really, although there's a spectrum on the grading scale, you really have a forced option. Either you choose to do what you need to do to pass, or you fail. There's no in between. On the other hand, when you go to a restaurant and the waitress asks if you want soup or salad, well, that's not a forced option, because you can actually say, I'm good, I don't want anything. I'll just wait for the main course. Finally, James distinguishes between a momentous versus a trivial choice. A momentous choice is a big deal choice. It's usually a once-in-a-lifetime kind of decision. This will impact you from here on out. It is a matter of great importance, maybe even life or death, maybe even eternity. On the other hand, a trivial choice is one that does not really have a significant impact on your life. Moreover, it's likely you will have additional options to make that choice again. So at the restaurant, when I'm trying to order my food and I'm torn between the Reuben or the mushroom Swiss burger, and I choose the Reuben, torn as I may have been, I'm not distraught that I chose the Reuben, because I know, well, next time I'll just get the mushroom Swiss burger. In light of these distinctions, William James is pointing out that the question of whether or not I should believe in God, well, it's a big deal choice. Either there is a God or not, and that either or has great impact on my life, especially in light of eternity. It's an unavoidable choice. If I am given the choice to choose God and I don't choose, then by default, I chose not to choose. So I fall on the side of not choosing. And if there is a God and the choice to believe in God impacts my existence in eternity, then it was most definitely a meaningful, personally applicable, or live option. So James might agree that in many cases, we might have epistemic responsibilities. We should not just believe anything without sufficient evidence. However, there may be some beliefs, for example, the belief in God, if that belief is live, momentous, and forced upon us. In that case, significant as the question is, then in that case, we can be justified in believing something even without evidence. Let's look further at the problems for justification. Now, to be clear, justification refers to the reason that we give in support for our view. Now, suppose J. Jonah Jameson sees Spider-Man swing into the ballroom amongst the guests and says, "Spider-Man is in the ballroom." But actually, expecting that no one saw him swing into the ballroom, as soon as he did, he took cover and removed his mask. So, at the moment that J. Jonah Jameson says Spider-Man is in the ballroom, there is no masked figure whom we identify as Spider-Man. There is Peter Parker. Jameson is not saying Peter Parker is in the ballroom. He's saying Spider-Man's in the ballroom. He's justified in his belief that Spider-Man came in to the ballroom. Is he still justified in his belief that Spider-Man remains in the ballroom? Can he say that he has knowledge that Spider-Man is still there? This is called the Gettier problem. There are situations in which one might believe him or herself to have a justified true belief, and yet they may not actually have knowledge. Having recently hulked out, suppose the Incredible Hulk is standing on the corner of a street and General Ross, coming to fight him, sees him and says, "The hulking monster is green," or "the hulking monster has green skin." Now, we may know this to be true. Actually, in some cases, if you follow the comics, the Hulk has not always been green. But supposing we are talking about the Green Hulk, we may know this to be true. But supposing this is General Ross's first time to see the Hulk, does he have knowledge? Well, as it turns out, the emergency lighting above and around the Hulk is green. So it may be the case that the Hulk is green, but does General Ross have actual knowledge that the Hulk is green when in fact the Hulk was standing beneath green light? So Gettier cases press the point that we may have a justified true belief. That is, we actually believe something, it is true, and we have justification for it. However, the reasons that justify our belief turn out to be false or not good enough. Even if the Hulk is green, in this case, our reasons for thinking he is green, that is, we saw him, are not good enough. Even if Spider-Man did swing into the building and Jameson saw this, the fact that he saw Spider-Man swing into the building is not enough to justify his claim for now knowing that Spider-Man remains in the building. So we cannot claim to have actual knowledge then. This means that the theory is incomplete. Something more is needed. Consider also the question, can there be such a thing as a justified false belief? Spoiler alert, what about children who believe in St. Nick on the testimony of their parents? There is reason to trust their parents, and yet the belief is false. Although there was a St. Nicholas, and he was generous, he did not fly around on reindeer and visit all children in the world. Are our children justified in believing that this is true? Or were folks in the Middle Ages justified in believing that the earth was flat, given that there were no defeaters for that view? And based on the information they had, and based on the predominant opinions, doxa, this view is reinforced. So they had a belief, they had justification for it. It turns out it was false. Can it be said that they still had knowledge, or that they had good reasons for believing what they believed? This brings us to a distinction in the grounding for justification. Internalism holds that your grounding for justification is internal to your mind. This includes the deontological, which means duty-based, involving duties, the deontological view of epistemic justification, which holds that we have epistemic duties. I ought not to believe something without good reasons for believing it. So here the justification has to do with my internal process. If I have good reasons for supporting the belief, then and only then am I justified in believing, and can I assert a claim on knowledge. Externalism, however, holds that the things that determine whether something is true or false often lie beyond the believer. Sometimes there are things that we cannot actually know in their entirety. So a person doesn't have to have cognitive access to all the grounding for justification before they can commit themselves to a belief. All that matters for a true belief to count as knowledge is that the belief is caused or formed in an appropriate way. Even if one's belief that the earth is flat is false, if that belief was formed in an appropriate way, according to the best understanding of reality at the time, then it could be said to count as knowledge, as much as anything could. Here we reach the question, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do we first form our belief and then find justifications for asserting knowledge about that belief? Or do we first encounter those justifiers? That is, those experiences that will become justifiers when they then support the belief that we form and we advance a claim on knowledge. Does belief come before knowledge, or does knowledge come before belief? There are different views on this. Some hold that belief comes before knowledge. The no false belief theory and the no defeater theory both attempt to escape the get-here problem by adding qualification. So rather than rejecting the view that you must have a justified true belief, they accept that with qualification. You must have justification, your belief must be true, and you must actually believe it, and there's some other variable that needs to be considered in order to make the claim that you have knowledge. The causal theory holds that if one event leads to another, and that event leads to yet another, and that event causes me to form my beliefs, then I can still have a justified true belief about the first event, even if I did not directly experience the first event. So, for example, if Neil Armstrong walking on the moon leads to news coverage of that event, and if this historically significant moment leads to its inclusion in the majority of U.S. and world history textbooks, and if you have read from such a textbook that Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, despite the fact that you never actually witnessed any proof beyond this chain of testimony, you would still be justified in having knowledge, according to this theory. Suppose I visit the zoo and I see a zebra. How do I know that I am not really looking at a mule that has been painted to deceive me? According to tracking theory, if I have a tendency to believe something when it's true, and I have a tendency not to believe things when they are false, then I do know what I'm looking at. If I am able to track the truth in most circumstances, in other words, then I can be said to be justified in having knowledge that I see a zebra, even if I am actually looking at a mule painted to resemble a zebra. But again, not everyone takes a belief-first approach to epistemology. Contemporary debates have largely assumed that knowledge is something to be broken down into isolated ingredients. More recently, some philosophers have suggested, however, that we have it backwards. The knowledge-first view, which can even be tied back to Plato, holds that knowledge is not meant to be broken down into these smaller ingredients. Rather, a belief is an approximation of knowing. That is, believing a proposition consists of treating that proposition as if you knew it. For example, did you first believe that the earth was round and then come to know that fact? Or did you acquire knowledge about the world and then choose to believe it? Virtue epistemology holds that the understanding of knowledge must take into account personal character traits. Internalism and externalism both assume that the proper focus of epistemology is belief. Virtue epistemology proposes that the study of knowledge ought to be person-based. Thus, the key to knowledge is intellectual virtue. Aristotle's intellectual virtues emphasize the ability to perform logical operations and calculations and a practical wisdom. Other intellectual virtues include attentiveness, open-mindedness, good memory, diligent inquiry, inventiveness, intellectual courage, insight into persons, fairness in assessing evidence, charity in evaluating arguments, and discernment concerning the trustworthiness of sources. Virtue is a habit requiring intentional practice. This requires motivation. To the virtue epistemologist, knowledge is grounded in intellectual virtue. As to the challenge of the Gettier problem, in those cases, the belief was not brought about through intellectual virtue, thus the Gettier charge fails. Finally, diving even deeper into the depths of this week's topic, let us consider the noetic structure of our justifications. Noetic is related to the word nous, meaning mind. A noetic structure consists of the entire set of beliefs taken together with the logical and explanatory relations among those beliefs. Much of what we believe actually depends upon other beliefs. So the question here is, what is the proper structuring of a justified belief? Some skeptics insist that you have to give good reasons for your reason to hold any given belief. This chain of reasoning will continue on and on ad infinitum. Every new reason offered will always require another reason for holding that reason to be reasonable. This is called the regress problem. On the view of foundationalism, our justified beliefs are arranged like bricks in a wall. The wall is built from a foundation. The lowest bricks, or the foundation, are the basic beliefs. The foundation supports all of the higher bricks, the non-basic beliefs. Ground level basic beliefs are self-evident, self-justifying beliefs, and thus they require no further justification. Upon our properly basic beliefs, we then add our non-basic beliefs in order to build the wall of our worldview. But what counts as a properly basic belief? Here we have two approaches. The classical foundationalists held that a belief is properly basic if and only if it is self-evident to the believer, it is incorrigible for the believer, or it is evident to the senses of the believer. But here some might challenge, how did one come to believing in this criterion for properly basic beliefs? Is the belief in this criterion for a properly basic belief? Is that belief in itself properly basic? Or how do we know that this is the criterion for a properly basic belief? Modest foundationalists allow for more beliefs to count as properly basic. Instead, they hold that any belief that is held in a basic way, that is, it is not based upon other beliefs, can count as properly basic. When faced with a defeater, one must either present a defeater of that defeater, or no longer consider that belief to be properly basic, which means that he or she will need to seek new justifications for that belief if they are to continue believing it. Foundationalism solves the regress problem. You can't go on and on and on ad infinitum. You stop at the properly basic beliefs. But it is unclear how exactly our basic beliefs are justified. Critics take issue with the notion that information is just given to us in experience. Observation and perception are theory-laden. We perceive what we preconceive. Consider this famous painting. What do you see? If you've never seen it before, you might say, a duck. Yet if you turn it sideways, it looks more like a rabbit. What is it? Do we have knowledge of what we are looking at, or do we see what we preconceive we ought to see. The point is that we interpret meaning through the lens of the language games we were taught to play by the sociocultural contexts from which we come. At the end of the day, each culture and context gives meaning to its own language games, and we presuppose our basic beliefs from this. The foundationalist might respond that interpretation may succumb to theory-ladenness, but it does not follow from this that our immediate experiences have no direct awareness of things as they are. For example, we can all recognize Wittgenstein's duck rabbit as a drawing in itself. That is, even if we interpret experiences differently, we still share an objective awareness of the experience. One example here might be to appeal to aesthetics and the beauty of art. So because people call different things beautiful, some are quick to say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Yet while it is true that many people can look at the same thing and evaluate it differently in terms of its degree of beauty, everyone who looks at art has an awareness that beauty or beautiful actually means something, even when we disagree on where we find it. Moreover, the theory-ladenness claim is self-defeating. To observe that all observation is theory-laden is a problem, because the observation itself, that observation is theory-laden, would therefore be theory-laden. So how could we know this? Despite its defense, many philosophers have sought a different account of the structure of justification. In contrast to foundationalism, another view is coherentism. On this view, belief is not a ground-up structure like a wall. The justification for our beliefs functions more like a spider web. Beliefs are interconnected in such a way that the strength of any given area, that is, any given belief or group of beliefs, depends upon the strength of the surrounding areas. So any one belief I have, the strength of that belief depends on the strength of its surrounding beliefs, the other beliefs that hold it up. On a side note, make sure that you don't confuse coherentism with the coherence theory of truth. Does this view have problems? Well, first of all, there's the isolation problem. Having become mentally ill, Dave convinces himself that all propositions in the Lord of the Rings trilogy are true. And he believes himself to be one of the characters in the story, living on Middle-earth. His beliefs cohere, but are they justified? It seems unlikely because they are isolated from the real world. Then there is the alternative coherence systems problem. What if we have two people with equally coherent yet contradictory beliefs? Coherentism offers no means for judging which person's view is more likely true. Additionally, the regress problem remains. My belief for this proposition is justified if, and so long as, it coheres with my system of beliefs. But before I can accept this proposition as true, before I can believe this proposition or accept it as believable, I must determine whether it coheres with my beliefs. This would require that I form the belief that this proposition coheres with my system of belief. Let's call this belief that proposition P coheres with my system of belief Q. But how do I justify Q? I must now form belief R, the belief that Q coheres with my system of belief. But now this belief R will require the belief T, that R coheres with my system of beliefs ad infinitum. And so it is not clear that coherentism actually escapes the problem of regress. According to the position of reliabilism, to be justified in my belief, I do not need to inspect how each belief rests upon others or connects with surrounding beliefs. Unless I have actually encountered some reason to doubt the reliability of my senses or the testimony of a witness, etc., I am justified in trusting such means of acquiring knowledge. How do I know what I had for breakfast? How do I know that my memory is reliable or that my sense perception then was reliable? Well, on this view, unless I have reason to doubt the reliability of my memory or cognitive faculties, I am justified in believing that I actually remember accurately just what I ate for breakfast this morning. According to contextualism, epistemic justification is relative to context. Ordinary situations ask particular questions of justification about particular contexts. If I go to the zoo and I am trying to figure out whether I am justified in my belief that I see a zebra rather than a painted mule, I need not feel obligated to rule out whether I am in the matrix or being deceived by an evil demon to see the world around me. Such a broad question is not immediately relevant to the context of that specific question. However, if the question raised were not, could that zebra really be a painted mule? But instead, could that apparent zebra really just be a perceptual illusion caused by an evil genius? Now, one might not be justified in belief about the zebra unless he or she is able to offer a rebuttal against the evil genius thesis as well. However, it is not clear that the problem of regress has been satisfactorily addressed by contextualism. For example, take the belief that epistemic justification is relative to the context. What is our justification for that belief? Do we believe that because of some context, or is that belief justified by some other, more foundational belief? Welcome to the Problems of Epistemology, where we will be camping out for the next 3 weeks.